everyone, welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSeco. So these are the articles that we will be discussing today. So the first one, Constraining Critique. This basically is an article from yesterday's newspaper, but since there was no Thorough Newspaper Analysis yesterday, but this was the only most important article, so we have decided to take it up today. This article talks about the shutting down of the operations of Amnesty International from India. So why is it happening and what impact would it have on the society in India? We'll be discussing in this article. Secondly, pathways to diversity. So this actually talks about the cumulative action that is needed to be taken for the cause of saving the biodiversity of this world, and how much is it important for all the nations to work in this direction. Thirdly, China's climate commitment. Now, as we know that China is one of the largest emitters, I will not say this right now, maybe because then we have a related MCQ also today with this. So basically, China has committed to bring down its carbon emissions by the coming time. And what does it mean? And what does it mean for India also, we'll be discussing in this article. And fourthly, worldwide gender skew in COVID-19 think tanks. Now, as we know that think tanks are those bodies which actually promulgate any policies that actually think upon some particular issues. So there is a trend that has been seen currently that very less of women are associated with such COVID-19 think tanks. So why is it happening and what is the current scenario we'll be discussing in this article. And finally, we have the news in flash where we'll be discussing small and crisp news articles. Before that, let's have a look at the LawSeco courses that we have for you. So we have the Judiciary Test Prep course, which we call as a Lord of the courses. So if you are also preparing for Judicial Services exam, you can definitely have a look at this course. The link to this course is available in the description box below. From the landing page itself, you can also download free study material, which is very nicely drafted for all the Judicial Services aspirants. Then we have various other courses also. You may view them at the LawSeco webpage or landing pages. So here is the multiple choice question for the day. Which country is the largest carbon emitter? I guess you already have a hint. I have a hint. So your options are first USA, second India, third China, or fourth United Kingdom, that is England or the United Kingdom basically. So if you know the answer, do jot it down in the comment section below. Now this is a descriptive question for the day. Discuss the steps that must be taken by the world at large to curb the menace of climate change. What role does India have to play in this regard? So you have to write down the answer to this question within a word limit of maximum 230 to 300 words. And you can also jot it down below in the comment section. With this, let's start with the first article for the day, which talks about constructive critique and Amnesty International, which is there from yesterday's newspaper, The Hindu. Okay. So Amnesty International, as we know that this is an NGO, this is a non-governmental organization, which is an international body, it is an international organization. It has halted or stopped its operations in India after freezing of its bank accounts by the state agencies. So the various state agencies in India have actually frozen down the bank accounts of Amnesty International, due to which it is not able to function further in India. Amnesty International had won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977, and it is one of the major non-governmental bodies that work in the direction of human rights. And with this, India has joined Russia, where the group has already stopped functioning. Now let's see that why did India freeze the accounts of Amnesty International? Firstly, to prevent Amnesty International from interfering in domestic political debates by entities funded by foreign donations. Now, as we know that many a times it has come up that the current scenario of Indian democracy has become a bit too less tolerant about things. And Amnesty International, as we know that it is very prominent when it comes to the talk about human rights. So basically, Amnesty International had been questioning every now and then the functioning of the government, its agencies, its authority, and also its laws and various other things, that actually were considered to be against the human rights. But definitely this interference, in a way, this can be considered to be as an interference from the side of the government. It is not liked by these bodies, and that is why they have actually brought down the functioning of Amnesty International and have frozen their accounts. So Amnesty International, as we know, has taken up issues such as in India for reporting of decisions on abrogation of special status of JNK and various other human rights as well, and globally for various minority rights, ending torture, abolition of death penalty, and refugee rights as well. So that is why we know that Amnesty International has been playing a very, very important role when it comes not only to the Indian aspect but also on the global level. And that is why it was really crucial that Amnesty International is allowed to work within India's territory. And one another thing that needs to be noted very efficiently here is that very recently itself, the government passed an amendment to Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. It was actually, even though without consulting the stakeholders. And the new amendment to the FCRA Act has actually already made the functioning of those NGOs that depended or actually they had the any kind of funds coming from the foreign agencies. So they have also been put down to a very great extent. So in a way we can see that India as a democracy or as a functioning body is becoming a bit too closed, and it should not really do that. We should be very proud of being a sovereign nation, and we should be very confident about our own sovereignty. And that is why any closeness coming from this end is definitely detrimental for the global image that we have of India as a very friendly and connective nation. And that is why we should hope that the FCRA Act also does not make the rules so stringent for the NGOs in India, and also important bodies like Amnesty International are also given due regard and they're allowed to function within India. Now here we should know that what is the role of the civil societies in reforms we've already discussed. Like for example, we have had various, like the RTI Act that ensured accountability and transparency. This also came through the movements coming from the civil societies. Then for the cause of employment, we have the Manrega. For privacy rights, we have them. Then for rights of sexual minorities, environmental activism, etc., and many more. So these are the most important roles or the most important subjects of any society, and especially if we talk about India as well. And these civil societies, they're actually working a lot to reform or to bring reforms in these areas. Now, what steps must India take to become a developed nation and to become a developed and just nation is that it should build its demographic dividend and procedural institutions. Now, a demographic dividend, we simply mean that we should make the optimum or the best use of our own youth or young population. That can be something really best and I can add as an asset to the nation. And secondly, we should strengthen entrepreneurship, governmental actions and other economic tools rather than just focusing upon putting down such humanitarian groups or something like that. We should actually focus on these two prime areas. Now the next one, that is from today. Now the articles from here are from today's newspapers, today's The Hindu and Indian Express. So this one talks about biodiversity. So the United Nations Summit on Biodiversity was convened on September 30, 2020. And let's see that what actually was the center of discussion that the members had taken up. The members of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and they actually took a note of the link that exists between biodiversity loss and spread of animal pathogens. Now, as we know that COVID-19 itself, as we know, it is one of the forms of SARS, which was severe acute respiratory syndrome. It is also known as SARS-CoV-2 also. So we know that it has been caused due to some of the animal, but due to obviously we have not been able to come up with surety as to which animal has been the real cause behind the spread of COVID-19. Like for SARS first one, which was approximately in the years 2003-2002. So it was considered to be coming from the bat. But for COVID-19, it is sure that it is coming from some animal, but from which one it was not really clear. But as we know that this has actually made it has been possible due to the biodiversity loss and the spread of animal pathogens, because it says that along with the biodiversity loss that we are facing in the whole world currently, the anthropogenic interaction or the human-animal conflict or the interaction has increased to such an extent that it has become really very possible for such animal pathogens to travel very easily to the humankind, and that is one of the reasons why COVID-19 was able to come from any of the animals to the human generations. So it actually had a consensus that Aichi targets have failed in. Basically, Aichi targets were decided in the year 2010 to 11, and these were the targets. These were 20 targets that were taken to be adopted till 2020. And Aichi is actually, it's a very important area. It's an important city in Japan, and over there, keeping in mind all the members and all the agenda that were important for the world biodiversity, they were taken up. But unfortunately, it has been a sheer failure on part of almost all the member nations to have achieved those Aichi targets. So they have not really been able to do that, and they have failed in specifically, if we talk about, in reform or phasing out of subsidies that erode biodiversity, steps for resource use within safe ecological limits, preventing industrial fisheries from destroying threatened species, end to pollution including plastic. So in others also we have not really excelled as such, but in these 4 of the Aichi targets we have miserably failed. And then there has been success in partial progress on protecting surface and subsurface water, inland, coastal and marine areas. There some improvement has been seen, but that also we need to boost up a lot if we really need to work in the favor of protecting the biodiversity at a greater scale. Now, if we talk about India and biodiversity, 1970s and 1980s have laws so we have laws coming from 1970s and 1980s that have protected the islands of biodiversity. And actually in India, 5% of area, which, just as a percentage, if we see, it seems to be quite less, but it is actually a very huge area when it comes to an entire, to say, a landmass. 5% area is considered to be as a protected area. And as we know that we have various acts like the Environmental Protection Act 1986. So these are various acts that come from the era of 1970s and 80s, and they have played significant roles in protecting the biodiversity in India. But definitely we need to be more vigilant with the coming time. But now due process is being dispensed with for easy extraction of resources. But now another issue that we need to quickly address is that the very new environmental impact assessment rules or norms 2020 that have come up and have actually alarmed all the environmentalists and environment protectors, because this has made it really easy for various industrialists, various other people to exploit the environment at a very low cost, due to which all of these laws, which will actually be, they'll remain just as dummies, and there will be no point having these laws if the EIA rules are not made more strengthened and stronger. So this was for this article, and almost a similar article, but then again it is specifically about the climate change commitment. So it talks about the China's climate commitment. So President Xi Jinping, who is the president of China, has announced that China would be carbon net zero 2060, and announced the deadline for reaching emission peak to before 2030 by 2030. So basically this is something, the main thing that we need to understand here is that what do we mean by being carbon net zero? So it means that any kind of industrial activities or any kind of transportation or any kind of activities, mostly when we take up mostly the economic activities, they tend to release carbon or some forms of carbon, like what we call as the carbon emission or basic form of pollution that we say. But if we grow more and more trees, we know that the trees are the best absorbent of carbon dioxide. So it basically tries to balance the emission that takes place. Now, being carbon net zero, we mean that, for example, if we are releasing 5 units of carbon, so the trees or the jungles that we have, the forests that we have, are able to absorb exactly 5 units of that carbon. So in a way, the carbon emitted has been completely absorbed, and the net emission of carbon becomes to be zero. That is what we know as the carbon net zero. There are many areas which are also carbon positive in their close links, but most of the areas are going either they're mostly going carbon negative. So it is like they're producing more of the carbon emission than the trees can actually absorb, and that is why we need to take care of this fact. Now, the significance of China's commitment and net zero is, firstly, net zero, as we know, it requires countries to significantly reduce their emissions while increasing the land and forest sinks. Just because, why? Because I just told you the explanation to this, that are able to absorb emissions. Then carbon removal techniques can be used. Technology or techniques can be used when there are inadequate sinks. So now, what actually, by inadequate sinks, we mean that many a times what happens is that due to some geographical restraints, a lot of forestation in a particular area is not possible, right? Maybe there is lack of land, maybe there is lack of quality of that soil, maybe the best of the trees that can absorb most of the carbon cannot be grown due to the climate or the weather conditions, the rain, the humidity available, the salinity, or there could be any geographical reasons for that. Now, in such areas where inadequate sinks are there, which means that we do not have an adequate area to sink down the carbon emissions, we can use carbon removal techniques. A very good example of this is Delhi city itself. Now, if we talk about the NCR, that is the National Capital Region for Delhi, so there, as we know, that it's just a concrete jungle, so you really can't find a huge area for forestation or to grow significant amount of trees. And that is why the government has come up with the idea of smog towers. So basically these are almost like 20-meter high towers that actually are mounted at various places in the city, and they in a way they absorb the pollution and then they emit out clean air out of these towers. And that is why this is one of the examples of having removal through the technology in the city specifically. Then the global net neutrality by 2050 is the only way to achieve Paris Agreement target of keeping global temperature limited to 2 degrees. Now, as we know that the global warming is increasing every day, so under the Paris Agreement, the countries, the member nations had vowed to bring down the temperature of the Earth, the global temperature by Earth by at least 2 degrees. And this target can only and only be achieved if we really are able to achieve the carbon net neutrality by 2050 altogether at the globe. Now, the significance of China's commitment is that China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gas. Now, here we should know that China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. 30% of the total emissions come from China, and then more than the combined emission of the 3 countries of US, EU, and India. So, not all of these together produce this much of carbon emission as it is done by China. And as we know that China is an industrial hub, it has the best and even the highest of the manufacturing units available in its own area, and that is one of the reasons why it is one of the biggest carbon emitters. It's the biggest actually carbon emitter in the world. After that we have US, and then on third number we have India, and then after some stages the European Union also falls back. Now other countries are there. So among the big emitters, only European Union has committed towards net zero by 2050, and we also need to get into this race. South Africa has declared its intention to become carbon neutral by 2050, and US has walked out of Paris Agreement. So we have many times noticed that US has developed this tendency of walking out of major conventions or major deals for that matter, and US being the second largest emitter should definitely have vowed to become carbon neutral at least by 2050, but currently it has actually walked out of the Paris Agreement. Now, what is India's commitment? Let's see that what actually in this scenario does India have to say, or what is India doing in this direction? So it resisted the pressure to make a long-term commitment. Now, basically what happens is that since India and China are the 2 economies that fight with each other to secure the global position of being one of the largest economies, we have a very cutthroat competition when it comes to economic growth. And since now China has vowed to bring down its carbon emission, in a way eyes have come up to India that India will also take some similar steps. But keeping in mind the situation, the scenario of Indian economy and the Indian manufacturing system currently, India has resisted to take any pressure to make any long-term commitment. But for the basic ones, we are actually fulfilling our national commitments, and India is one of those countries that is actually working in this direction of bringing down the global temperature under the Paris Agreement. And India has also cited the failure of various developed countries to fulfill their promises. Now, a very good example of United States can itself be taken, that it has actually walked out of the Paris Agreement. So obviously, these countries, the developed nations that first used the industries to make their economy stronger, that first used the carbon, or the fossil fuels to fuse up, to induce strength to their industries. Now they have become developed, and now they're actually shedding off their shoulders with the responsibility of bringing down the carbon emission. This is not justified. Now, the steps taken by India are far more robust than various developed countries, and India is the only G20 country whose actions are on track to meet the 2-degree goal. Now, effect of China's commitment on India would be that it will increase pressure on India, as we just discussed, to agree on some long-term commitment, and it increase the divergence in the position of India and China at the climate negotiations, because obviously India is not ready to take up any long-term commitments due to its economic constraints, but China has taken these. So definitely there are divergences in the opinions of the two countries at climate negotiations. Now, this is the last article for the day, which talks about the gender ratio in COVID think tanks. So an analysis published in the BMG Global Health has revealed that majority of the decision-making bodies are dominated by men. So even when it comes to the think tanks that are closely associated with the COVID-19 thinking or the COVID-19 plans at the global level, they are also mostly dominated by men. So what does the report reveal? Let's see in the factual manner. More than 85% of the COVID-19 decision-making bodies, now this could be even, the World Health Organization, then various other reports, various other, bodies that are working for the function, bringing out of vaccines, etc. So they and key advisory body in the 87 countries are dominated by men. So 85% of the COVID-19 decision-making think tanks, which is a very huge number. So 81%, that are 65 bodies were headed by men. So if we talk about the complete headingship or the headership, there 81% of these out of these 87 countries. So of the 65 bodies, they were headed by men, and only 11.5% of the groups or the task forces were predominated by women. Gender parity is just 3.5%, which is very, very bizarre, because when at one side we talk about the gender parity, gender equality, and also, making men and women to, equal. So this actually is not really sufficing what we say. Governance in the bodies of groups are not inclusive at all. And very recently we discussed one of the articles coming from the Hindu, I suppose, or it was from the Indian Express. We discussed it in the thorough newspaper analysis as well, that the recent trends have shown that the countries that actually were governed and led by women leaders have actually, they have fared well, or even they have performed way better in handling the situation of COVID-19. And a very good example of New Zealand was given. So New Zealand actually from at least last 120 to 150, at least 120 days, it has not witnessed even a single case of COVID-19, and the country has had a very good growth now, and almost unlockdowns have been taken into account. So, and various other examples of some other few countries were also given. And thus it is just no argument to say that women leadership is not capable enough or something like that. It is just a bogus concept. It should not be in the minds of anybody in this world. And the recommendations that have been given are that reaching a critical mass of women in leadership should be there. Higher quality of monitoring and management should be taken place. More effective risk management techniques should be adopted, and robust deliberation should be given irrespective of the gender, be it a man or a woman. It should be given equally depending upon their skills. Now let's see, what do we have for news in flash today. First, branded witches, 2 killed and cremated in Assam. Now the reason why we have taken up this point coming from the Hindu today, to highlight the problem of mob lynching, which is very, very specific in the state of Assam, and not only in Assam but various other states like Maharashtra, in South Indian states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and like Rajasthan, UP, etc. So, but this problem of witchcraft or branding some women as witches is more prominent in the area of northeastern states, or specifically if we talk about Assam. So this is the one social issue that we wanted to bring to your view or to your notice. And here also 2 women were killed and cremated, and they were killed by 9 people for allegedly practicing witchcraft in Rahimpur or Dibu, Assam. So here the murder has been registered under IPC, and they have a specific act working for it, which is the Assam Witch Hunting Prohibition, Prevention and Protection Act 2015. Second, threefold increase in leopard capture. As per a study published in the paper Policy to On-Ground Action Evaluating a Conflict Policy Guideline for Leopards in India. You don't really need to remember the name of this. So it was there in the Journal of International Wildlife Law and Policy. So it has revealed that there has been a 3 times increase from 1.5 to 4.6 after the human leopard policy was brought into 2011. So a lot of more of leopards have been captured and relocated or translocated from one area to the other, which definitely is a not good sign, and another example of the human man or the animal man conflict, and also the anthropogenic indulgence or involvement into the habitats of the wildlife. Thirdly, Andhra Pradesh to give pattas to tribals. So pattas basically they refer to the small pieces of land. CM Jagan Mohan Reddy has announced that over the next month, around 1.53 lakh tribals will get pattas for 3 lakh acres of land, along with first 2 installments worth rupees 13,500 under YSR Raithu Bharosa. So this is one of the schemes that are functioning over there, and here it is a very good step that has been taken for the mobilization and also for the growth of tribals in the area. A minimum of 2 acres is being allocated to each needy family. Now, last for the day would be today is the 20th anniversary of strategic partnership between Russia and India. As we know that Russia and India, they hold a very good relationship even after the Cold War period. So we have developed a very good relationship with Russia, and Russia is one of the biggest and most important partners of India when it comes to the defense equipments. And India has also invested into various steps in Russia for growth of Russia as well. One of the examples is the Act Far East policy, in which India would be investing a lot through soft loans and through a line of credits going to Russia. The declaration was signed on 3rd October 2000. So in the year of 2000, during the first state visit of Vladimir Putin, he was the president of Russia. The partnership goes beyond the traditional areas and involves sectors such as Indian nuclear power sector and Indian energy security. And even now, as we know that hopefully Russia would be coming up with the most a potential vaccine for COVID-19 called as Sputnik 5. So India also already is in talks with Russia for the supply of that vaccine to be given to India as well. Indian partners show growing engagement in Russian Far East oil. So just exactly what I told about the Act Far East policy and gas, and coking coal, diamonds, innovation, infrastructure, and other projects as well. So this was all for today. We hope it was a good session for you. Stay tuned with LawSikho for such more sessions to come. Thank you so much.